Section 3 of Abe and Mawruss. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Abe and Mawruss, Being Further Adventures of Potash and Perlmutter, by Montague Glass. Chapter 3, Dead Men's Shoes. Part 1. There goes that sucker, Aaron Kronberg, from Port Sullivan, Abe Potash declared to his partner, Morris Perlmutter, as they looked from the windows of their showroom to the opposite sidewalk some 4 stories below. Ain't it funny that fellow would never buy from us $1 worth more goods? The reason ain't hard to find, Abe, Morris replied. Once a garment buyer gets into the hands of a competitor like Leon Samet, it's all off. I bet you Leon tells him we're all kinds of crooks and swindlers. What could you expect from a cutthroat like Leon Samet? That fellow's no good, and his father before him is also a thief. I know his people from the old country yet. One was worser as the other. Well, there's nothing the matter with Aaron's cousin, Alex Kronberg, anyhow, Morris observed. That fellow does a fine business in Bridgetown, and Samet brothers can no more take his trade away from us than they could fly. That ain't our fault, Morris, Abe rejoined. Samet brothers is fly enough to do anything, Morris, but the way Aaron Kronberg hates Alex Kronberg, if they was to sell Alex a single garment, you understand, Aaron would never buy from them $1 worth more goods so long as he lived. Ain't it a disgrace them 2 fellas are such enemies, Abe? Alex ain't no enemy, Morris, Abe said. It's Aaron what's the enemy. Alex don't trouble himself at all. He told me so himself. But that's the way it goes, Morris. Moshe Kronberg, Hillel Kronberg, and Elkin Kronberg was 3 brothers, which you don't see nowadays at all. More like friends than brothers, Morris. Hillel died 10 years ago, and I thought it would broke Moshe's heart. He looked after Hillel's widow and Hillel's boy, Alex, because Moshe never married, Morris. He was a born uncle. Then when Elkin died a year later, you never saw a fella so broke up like Moshe in all my life. He goes to work and sends Elkin's boy, Aaron, to business college. And Elkin's widow he takes to live with Hillel's widow, all together with himself and the 2 boys in that house of his on Madison Street. For 3 years they lived that way, and in the rest of the house, Moshe couldn't keep any tenants at all. At last, he gives Aaron a couple of $1,000, and Alex the same. And Aaron buys up a store in Port Sullivan, and Alex goes up to Bridgetown. What became of the widows, Abe? Morris asked. I don't know is Elkin's widow living now or not, Abe said, but Moshe told me Hillel's widow wants to get married again, and Alex comes up to him and says he should give the old lady anyhow $1,000. Moshe wants to know what for, and Alex tells him he owes it from Hillel's estate, yet a couple of $1,000. And did he? Morris inquired. Suppose he did, Abe replied. He is entitled to it after what he puts up with during them 3 years they lived together. Well, Moshe and Alex gets right away fighting about it, and I guess Alex would have sued Moshe in the courts yet, only the old lady goes to work and dies on him all of a sudden. But why is Aaron and Alex such enemies, Abe? Morris asked. Well, it's like this, Morris. Aaron and Alex is good friends, until Uncle Moshe cuts Alex out of his will. You see, Aaron and Alex is the only 2 relations which Moshe got at all, so naturally when Aaron thinks he is coming in for the whole thing, he begins to get sore at Alex. And the more Aaron thinks that the old man really ought to leave half to Alex, the more he gets sore at Alex. The whole business is dead wrong, Abe, Morris commented. In the first place, the old man ain't got no right to leave his money only to Aaron. And in the second place, Aaron ain't got no right to feel sore at Alex. And furthermore, Alex ought to go around and see his uncle once in a while when he's in New York. In the third place. Well, why don't you tell him so this afternoon, Morris? Abe said. Alex is staying up at the Prince Clarence since last night already, and he said he would be sure down here this afternoon. I will do so, Morris replied firmly. Go ahead, Abe said. Only one thing I got to tell you, Morris. There is some customers which would stand anything, Morris. You could ship 'em 2 garments short in every order. You can send 'em goods which ain't no more like the sample than bread is like matzahs. You could overcharge 'em in your statements. You could even draw on 'em one day after their account is due, and still they would buy goods from you. But as soon as you start to butt into their family affairs, Morris, that's the finish, Morris. They'd leave you like a shot." "Alex Kronberg wouldn't take it so particular," Morris retorted. "He knows I'm only doing it for his own good." "Oh, if you're only going to do it for his own good, Morris, then that's something again," Abe said. "Because in that case, we would not only lose him for a customer, Morris, but we would also make an enemy of him for life." "You shouldn't worry," Morris replied as he put on his hat, preparatory to going out to lunch. "I know how to take care of a customer all right." Nevertheless, Morris cogitated his partner's advice throughout the entire lunch hour, and over his dessert he commenced to formulate a tentative plan for restoring Alex Kronberg to his inheritance. 2 cups of coffee and a second helping of mont cake aided the process of celebrating this scheme, so that when Morris returned to his place of business it was nearly 2 o'clock. "Abe," he said as he entered, "I've been thinking over this here matter about Alex Kronberg, and I ain't going to talk to Alex about it at all. You know what I'm going to do?" Abe grabbed his hat and turned to Morris with a savage glare. "Sure, I know what you're going to do, Morris," Potash bellowed belligerently. "Henceforth, from tomorrow on, you're going to do this, Morris. You're going to lunch after I am coming back. I could drop dead from hunger already, for all you care. I got a stomach too, Morris, and don't you forget it." Moshe Kronberg lived on the ground floor of his own tenement house on Madison Street. And to say that Aaron Kronberg worshipped the ground his uncle walked on would be to utter the literal truth. "Well, Uncle, how do you feel today?" Aaron inquired, the morning after Abe and Mawruss had so thoroughly discussed the Kronberg family relations. "I could feel a whole lot better, Aaron, and I could feel a whole lot worse," Moshe Kronberg replied. "Them suckers has been after me again." "Which ones are they now?" Aaron asked, his curiosity aroused. "An orphan asylum," Moshe replied. "The gall which some people got it, Aaron. Honestly, you wouldn't believe it at all. They want me I should give 'em $250. I told 'em time enough when I would die, Gotzelhütten." "What are you talking nonsense, Uncle Moshe?" Aaron broke in. "You ain't going to die for a long time yet. And anyhow, Uncle Moshe, if people goes to work and has children which they couldn't support while they're living even, why should they get any of your money to support them even after you're dead? No one asks them suckers they should have children. Ain't I right?" "Sure, you are right," Uncle Moshe agreed. "Hospitals also, Aaron. If I got one hospital bothering me, I must got a dozen. Why should I bother myself with hospitals, Aaron? A low-life gambler hangs around liquor saloons all times of the night till he gets sick, you understand? Then he must go to a hospital and get well on my money yet? I see myself." "What hospital was that?" Aaron inquired. "The Mount Hebron Hospital," Uncle Moshe replied. "There's the catalog now. They're sending it to me this morning only." Aaron seized the annual report and list of donating members of the hospital and opened it at the letter K. "You know what I think, Uncle?" Aaron cried. "I think that Alex Kronberg puts him up to asking you for money." "Alex puts him up to it," Moshe repeated. "What for should Alex do such a thing?" "Here, let me show you," Aaron cried. "Alex himself gives them fakers $5. Here it is in black and white. Alex Kronberg, Bridgetown, Pennsylvania, $5. Uncle Moshe adjusted a pair of eyeglasses to his broad, flat nose and perused the record of his nephew's extravagance with bulging eyes. "Well, what do you think for a sucker like that?" he exclaimed. "I tell you the honest truth, Uncle," Aaron said. "I don't want to say nothing about Alex at all, but the way the fella's acting just because he does a little good business in his store, honestly, it's a disgrace. He sends my mother for $10 a birthday present too. Do I need that sucker? He should give my mother birthday presents. He's throwing away his money left and right, and the first thing you know, he's coming to you, borrowing yet." "He should save himself the trouble," Uncle Moshe declared. His tongue should be hanging out of his mouth with hunger, Aaron, and I wouldn't give him Osa 1 cent. Aaron's face broke into 1,000 wrinkles as he beamed with satisfaction. Well, Uncle, he said, I must be going. I got a whole lot of things to do today. Take care of yourself. Don't worry about me, Aaron's Uncle Moshe replied. I could take care of myself, all right. You wouldn't drink maybe a glass of schnapps or something before you go? No? All right. He always delayed his proffer of hospitality until Aaron was on the front stoop. After the latter had turned the corner of Pike Street, Uncle Moshe lingered to take the morning air. A fresh breeze from the southwest brought with it a faint odor of salt herring and onions from the grocery store next door, while from the bakery across the street came the fragrant evidence of a large batch of kummelbrot. He sighed contentedly and turned to re-enter the house, but even as he did so, he wheeled about in response to the greeting, "How do you do, Mr. Kronberg?" The speaker was none other than Morris Perlmutter, who had tossed on his pillow until past midnight, devising a plan for approaching Uncle Moshe in a plausible manner. Now that his quarry had fallen so opportunely within his grasp, Morris's face wreathed itself in smiles of such amiability that Uncle Moshe grew at once suspicious. "You got the advantage from me," he said. "Why, don't you know me?" Morris cooed. "I think," Uncle Moshe replied guardedly. "I seen you oncet before somewheres. You're a collector for a hospital or an orphan asylum or some such sucker game, ain't it?" Morris laughed mirthlessly. His discarded plan for renewing his acquaintance with Uncle Moshe had involved the pretense that he was seeking to interest the old gentleman in the Home for Chronic Invalids, Independent Order Matai Aaron, of which fraternity Morris was an active member, and Uncle Moshe's apparent distaste for organized charity proved rather disconcerting. "You're a poor gasser, Mr. Kronberg," he said. "Then you are connected with some charity, ain't it?" Uncle Moshe continued. Morris denied it indignantly. "Gotzelhoten," he said. "My name is Mr. Perlmutter, and I'm in the cloak and suit business." "Oh, I remember now," Uncle Moshe cried. The news that Morris was no charity worker restored him to high good humor. "I remember you perfect now," he said, shaking hands effusively with Morris. "You got a partner by the name Potash, ain't it?" "That's right," Morris replied. "And what brings you over here in this Nachbarschaft?" Uncle Moshe inquired. Morris looked from Uncle Moshe to the tarnished brass plate on the side of the tenement house door. It read as follows: N. Kronberg, Real Estate. "The fact is," Morris said, "I'm coming to see you in a business way. If you've got time, I'd like to say a little something to you." "Come inside," Uncle Moshe grunted. He thought he discerned a furtive timidity in his visitor's manner, strongly indicative of an impending touch. "In the first place," he began, after Morris was seated, "I ain't got so much money which people think I got it." "I never thought you did," said Morris, and Uncle Moshe glared in response. "But I ain't no beggar neither, you understand," he retorted. "I got a little something left, anyhow." "Sure, I know," Morris agreed. "But what have you got or what you ain't got is neither here nor there. I'm coming over this morning to ask you something, a question." Here he paused. He had not yet determined what that question would be, and it occurred to him that unless it were sufficiently momentous to account for his presence on the Lower East Side during the busiest hours of a business day, Uncle Moshe would show him the door. "Go ahead and ask it then," Uncle Moshe broke in impatiently. "I couldn't sit here all day." "The fact is," Morris said slowly, and then his mind reverted to the brass plate on the door, and at once he proceeded with renewed confidence. "The fact is, I'm coming over here to ask you something, a question which a friend of mine would like to buy a property on the East Side." "A property?" Uncle Moshe repeated. "A property is something else again. What for a property would your friend like to buy it? A fine property, Morris replied. A property like you got it here. But this here property ain't for sale, Uncle Moshe said. I got the house here now since 1890 already, and I guess I would keep it. Sure, I know, that's all right, Morris went on. But I thought even if you wouldn't want to sell the house, you know such a whole lot about real estate, Mr. Kronberg, it could help us out a little. The hard lines about Uncle Moshe's mouth relaxed into a smile. Well, when it comes to real estate, he said, I ain't a fool exactly, you understand? That's what I was told, Morris continued. A friend of mine, he says to me, if anyone could tell you about real estate, Moshe Kronberg could. There's a man, he says, which his opinion you could trust in it, anything what he says is so. If the Astors and the Golitz would know about East Side real estate, what the fella knows, understand me, instead of their hundreds of millions, they would have thousands of millions already. Uncle Moshe fairly beamed. Yes, Mr. Kronberg, Morris went on, without taking a breath. He says to me you should go and see Uncle Moshe. He's a gentleman and he would treat you all right. But I says to him, I get no right to butt in your Uncle Moshe. You see, Alex, I says. Alex? Uncle Moshe cried. Did Alex Kronberg send you here? That's who it was, Morris replied. Then all I can say is, Uncle Moshe thundered, you should go right back to Alex and tell him from me that I says any friend of his which he comes to me looking for information about real estate, he's lucky I don't kick him into the street yet. He jumped up from his chair and opened the door leading into the public hall. Go on, he roared, out from my house. Morris rose leisurely to his feet and pulled a large cigar from his pocket. If that's the way you feel about it, Mr. Kronberg, shun good. I wouldn't bother you any more. At the same time, Mr. Kronberg, if ever you should want to sell the house, you understand? Let me know. That's all. As he passed out of the door, he laid the cigar on a side table, and its bright red band immediately caught the eye of Uncle Moshe. He pounced on it, and was about to hurl it after his departing visitor, when something about the smoothness of the wrapper made him pause. 5 minutes later, he lolled back in a horsehair-covered rocker and puffed contentedly at Morris's cigar. After all, he said, I might get a good price for the house anyway. From Moshe Kronberg's tenement house on Madison Street to the Cloak and Suit District at 19th Street and 5th Avenue is less than 2 miles as the crow flies. But Morris Perlmutter's journey uptown was accomplished in less direct fashion. He spent over half an hour in an antiquated horse car, and by the time the Broadway car to which he transferred had reached Madison Square, it was nearly 12 o'clock. As he walked down 19th Street, he almost collided with Abe, whose face wore a frown. Say, looky here, Morris, he cried. What kind of business is this? Here you are, just getting downtown, and I'm going out to lunch already. Sure, I know, Morris retorted. You think of nothing but your stomach. Believe me, Abe, I worked hard enough this morning. Worked nothing, Abe rejoined. You've been up to some monkey business, Morris. Otherwise, why should Moshe Kronberg telephone us just now? He thought the matter over since you left there, and he would be up to see you this afternoon already. What? Morris cried. Did Moshe Kronberg telephone that himself? All right, Morris, then I'm a liar, Abe exploded. I'm telling you with my own ears. I heard him. I believe you, Abe, Morris said soothingly. Don't hurry back from your lunch. I got lots of time. I would hurry back or not as I please, Morris, Abe retorted as he trudged off toward Hammersmith's restaurant. There he ministered to his outraged feelings with a steaming dish of gefilte Rinderbrust, and it was not until he had sopped up the last drop of gravy with a piece of rye bread that he became conscious of a stranger sitting opposite to him. Excuse me, said the latter. You got a little soup on the lapel of your coat. That ain't soup, Abe explained, as he dipped his napkin in the glass of ice water and started to remove the stain. That's a little gefilte Rinderbrust, which they fix it so thin and watery nowadays, it might just as well be soup the way it's always getting all over your clothes. Things ain't the same like they used to be," the stranger remarked. 25 years ago, a fella could get a meal down on Canal Street for a quarter, understand me, which it was really something you could say was remarkable. Take any of them places, Gifkins or the Wasserbauers, ain't that right? "Did you used to went to Gifkins?" Abe asked. "I should say," his V.A.V. replied. "When I was a boy of 15, I am eating always regular by Gifkins." "Me too. I used to eat a whole lot by Gifkins," Abe said. "In fact, I think must have seen you there." "I shouldn't wonder," the stranger continued. "At the time I was working by my old man Baum right across from Gifkins. He was my uncle already." "You are old man Baum's nephew?" Abe exclaimed. "How could that be? Old man Baum only got one brother, Nathan, which he got mixed up in a railroad accident near Knoxville. He was always up to some monkey business, that fella, all of a shalom." "Sure, I know," the stranger continued. "But old man Baum got also one sister, my mother, Mrs. Gershon. You must remember my father, Sam Gershon. Worked for years by Richter as a cutter. My name is Max Gershon." "Why, sure I do," Abe said, shaking hands with his newfound acquaintance. "So you're son of old man Gershon. Do you live here in New York, Mr. Gershon?" "No, I live in Johnsville, Texas," Mr. Gershon replied. "This is my first visit north in 25 years. Mr. Potash," Abe said. "Mr. Potash," Gershon continued. "I'm feeling pretty lonesome, I can tell you. All my folks is dead. My father, my mother, my two uncles, and there ain't a soul here in New York which remembers me at all." "Is that so?" Abe commented with ready sympathy. "Yes, Mr. Potash," Gershon said. "When I was a boy, I done a full thing. When I was 16 years old already, I run away from home because my father licked me. And I never wrote to him or sent no word to him until it was too late. You see, up to 5 years since, I didn't done so good. Everything seemed to went against me, Mr. Potash, but lately I'm doing a fine business for a small place like Johnsonville, and today I got the best store down there." "You don't say so!" Abe cried. "So I thought last month, instead I would go to Dallas or Fort Worth like I usually done, I would come straight on to New York and not only buy my fall goods, but also give the good old folks a surprise. And what do I find? Everybody's dead." Mr. Gershon pressed a handkerchief to his eyes. "You shouldn't take on so," Abe said, leaning across the table and placing his hand on Gershon's arm. "It's the way of the world, Mr. Gershon, and I could assure you we got the finest line of garments in our store, which is first-class stuff, up to the minute, and prices and everything just right." Mr. Gershon wiped his eyes. "You must excuse me, Mr. Potash," he said. "My feelings has got the better of me." "That's all right," Abe murmured. "Here is our card, and you should positively come up to see us. Even if you wouldn't buy from us a button, Mr. Gershon, it would be a pleasure for us to see you in our place." "I would sure be there," Mr. Gershon said as he pocketed the card. "Waiter," Abe called, "put this here gentleman's check on mine and bring us 2 of them 30-cent cigars." So eagerly did Morris await the advent of Uncle Moshe Kronberg in Potash and Perlmutter's store that he even omitted to notice his partner's prolonged absence at lunch. And when Abe returned to unfold the narrative of his meeting with a prospective customer, Morris heard it without interest. "The feller is A number 1, Morris," Abe said. "I stopped off to see Sam Feder at the Kosciuszko Bank, and Sam sent me to the Associated Information Bureau. He is rated 20 to 30,000 credit good." "Yes?" Morris replied. "Tell me, Abe, did Moshe Kronberg say just when he would be here?" "What are you wasting your time about Moshe Kronberg for?" Abe retorted. "We got enough to do. We should pick out a few good styles to show Gershon." Morris nodded absently. His thoughts were centered on a short old man with close-cropped beard, who at that very moment was turning the corner of Fifth Avenue and 19th Street. Simultaneously, Aaron Kronberg ran across the street from Sammet Brothers' doorway and clapped the old gentleman on the shoulder. "Hello, Uncle Moshe," he cried. "What are you doing around here?" "Couldn't I come uptown once in a while if I would want to?" Uncle Moshe replied, somewhat testily. "Sure, sure," Aaron Kronberg hastened to say. "Gee it?" I never eat in the middle of the day, Uncle Moshe said. I am up here on business. On business? Aaron repeated. What for business? I think I sold the house, Moshe replied. For one brief moment, Aaron gazed at his uncle, and then he linked his arm in that of the old man. Come over to 23rd Street and drink anyhow a cup of coffee, he said, and 10 minutes later they entered an enameled brick dairy restaurant. You say you think you sold the house? Aaron said, after a waitress had served them. Uncle Moshe nodded. He was emptying a cup of coffee in long, noisy inhalations and at the same time consuming cheese sandwiches with uncommonly keen appetite for a man who had never ate in the middle of the day. Yes, Aaron, Uncle Moshe said as he emerged all dripping from the cup. I think I sold the house, and I guess I would have another cup of coffee. Go ahead, Aaron replied. But what for you want to sell the house, Uncle Moshe? It brings you in anyhow a good income. A good income for some people, Aaron. But for me, not. What is 1,000 a year, Aaron? 1,000 a year, Uncle, is a whole lot, especially to a man like you who lives simple. My living expenses is very little, I admit, Aaron, Uncle Moshe replied, after he had disposed of the second cup of coffee, with noises approximating a bathtub full of soapy water disappearing down the waste pipe. I don't make no fuss about my living, Aaron, but you gotta remember, Aaron, that a man couldn't live on living expenses alone. Once in a while, a fellow likes to take a little flyer in the market and try and make a few dollars, ain't it? What? Aaron exclaimed. That was a phase of his uncle's character that he had never exposed before. Yes, Aaron, Uncle Moshe continued, living ain't only having a room to sleep in and food to eat, Aaron. Other things is living, Aaron. Stocks is living, and auction pinochle is also living, and going once in a while on theater is living too, Aaron. I may be an old man, Aaron, but I ain't dead yet. Aaron's pale face grew almost ghastly at these shocking disclosures, and when Uncle Moshe concluded his audacious creed with a furtive wink, his nephew visibly started. But you got plenty other money to invest in the stock market without you would sell the house, Uncle Moshe, he said. Have I? Uncle Moshe rejoined. That's news to me, Aaron. You see, in 1907 was a big panic, and some stocks is better as others. Them which ain't, Aaron, they went and gone so low, Aaron, they ain't never come back again and perhaps never will. Might you heard something about it in Port Sullivan, maybe? $10,000 I dropped on them suckers in Wall Street, Aaron. Uncle Moshe smiled blandly at his nephew, who grasped the edge of the table to steady his whirling senses. But what's the use talking? Uncle Moshe continued. What is forby, and I guess I would have another cup of coffee. You had enough coffee, Aaron cried sternly. So you gone and dropped your money on stocks, eh? Uncle Moshe shrugged and extended one palm in philosophic resignation. It was my own money, Aaron, he said. I didn't stole it. This ain't no time for making jokes, Uncle Moshe, Aaron retorted. Who was it you was going to sell the house to? Maybe you know him, Uncle Moshe said. It's a fella by the name of Morris Perlmutter. Aaron Kronberg's pallor gave way to a flood of crimson, and for a moment he choked incoherently as he gazed at Uncle Moshe in amazement. Why, that fella Perlmutter is a friend of Alex, he gasped at length. Sure, I know, Uncle Moshe replied, but even if he is a friend of Alex, his money ain't counterfeit. But he'd rob you of your shirt, Uncle Moshe, Aaron exclaimed. He's a dangerous fella. I'm used to dangerous fellas, Aaron, Uncle Moshe answered calmly. I told you before I dropped 10,000 in Wall Street. Yes, and if you had sold this here house, Uncle Moshe, you dropped 10,000 more. Not 10,000, Aaron. I only got 8,000 equity in the house. Again, Aaron stared at his uncle. Do you mean to tell me you only got $8,000 in the world? He groaned. The world is a pretty big place, Aaron, Uncle Moshe said. But I wouldn't lie to you anyhow. 8,000 is the figure. Then all I can say is, Uncle Moshe, before you got to go begging on the streets yet, you would better sell the house and come to live with me up in Port Sullivan. Uncle Moshe shrugged once more. I'll tell you the truth, Aaron, he said. I was going to suggest that to you myself yet. So let's get right off and see this here Perlmutter, and we'll talk about Port Sullivan later. Not by a damn sight, Aaron declared, as he rose from his chair and grasped his uncle firmly by the arm. You come with me, and we'll sell this house to a feller I know. End of section 3.